carbon removal show is going on tour. I'm so excited.
Pack your bags. Emily, on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you?
12.5.
12.5. I'm 13. I may not sound it, but I am excited.
Okay, I think we're about ready to go. Have we got everything you need? You got some currency, Tom?
Currency, check, I do. Have you got your wallet or your purse?
Yeah, it's got my currency in it.
Yeah. Have you got a microphone?
Got my microphone, check.
Good.
We've got to make sure we offset our flights, very important one.
Yes, that's important, but we'll cover that in the later episodes, but that is in mind.
We'll come to that.
One more thing. Emily, do you have your passport?
Tom, where was that question when I needed it?
I was already on a plane. Hello, everyone. I am Tom Praviti.
And I'm Emily Swaddle.
And welcome back to the Carbon Removal Show. Over the past couple of episodes, we've been looking at the state of carbon removal today in the UK, as well as all the particular challenges that country faces as it scales these projects up and works to make them equitable and deliverable. For the next 2 episodes, however, we've travelled 1,000 kilometres or so to see how another country is making its mark on the space.
That's right. Earlier this year, 4 members of the Carbon Removal Show team headed to Iceland for a bit of a field trip. Like us, you may have heard a bit about some of the exciting work happening in Iceland on carbon removal. And after speaking remotely with so many carbon removal businesses who are either based in Iceland or doing interesting work there, we had to know, what is so special about this small island country? And does it have anything to teach the rest of us about making carbon removal a reality?
We were initially invited by Business Iceland to attend the Ok-jökull event, a half-day climate conference in Reykjavik as part of Iceland Innovation Week. There, we spoke to investors, founders, and others about the work that they're doing in Iceland and beyond. And during the rest of our trip, we visited several climate tech businesses related to carbon removal, geothermal energy, and the circular economy to see some of this work on the ground.
We're splitting our trip into 2 episodes. This episode, you'll be hearing about the Ok-jökull event, and in the next, you'll be hearing about what happened when we hit the road. One thing to note, we met amazing people in Iceland who all spoke superb English. Unfortunately, our Icelandic still needs some work, so we apologise now for our pronunciation of the names of our guests. I'm so sorry. We will probably get it wrong. I'm so sorry.
Speak for yourself, Emily. I'm actually pretty proud of my pronunciations. I think they're pretty spot on.
You learned a lot from your time in Iceland, I see, Tom. First things first, the event was called Ok-jökull, but not just in the dismissive millennial sense. Okay, bye. The name is also a reference to the first Icelandic glacier lost to climate change, Ok, spelled O-K. The former glacier was melted to a fraction of its size and is actually officially no longer considered a glacier. This pun really set the tone for the event. On the one hand, it tried to remind us what's at stake, while on the other, it was willing to have a bit of fun and get us all enthused in order to tackle the challenge ahead.
It's as if they'd made this event purposely for us, given how much we love our puns.
Maybe they did. Maybe they thought those folk from the Carbon Removal Show are coming. We're going to name it something funny.
So we arrived in Iceland. However, when I say we, Emily actually had a minor disaster that curtailed her travel plans somewhat, let's say. Shall I tell the story, Emily, or do you want to tell them?
No, Tom, I'll tell them. I need to own this. Dear listeners, I forgot my passport. It was a complete disaster. I spent the whole night in hyper-logistics mode, trying to sort myself out, and eventually arrived in Iceland. Actually, only about 10 hours later than expected. And I think to the great surprise of my colleagues.
In the meantime, while Emily was dealing with her, no doubt, anxiety-inducing travel logistics, I arrived in Iceland with producer Ben and researcher Henry. And listeners, I don't know if you've ever been to Iceland, but it is truly unique. Flying into Reykjavik, you already get an idea of the volcanic landscape. There's very few trees, dramatic scenery, and a really beautiful, rugged coastline. Something else that you quickly notice arriving in May, as we were, is that it is light a lot of the time. and that took a bit of getting used to.
Some other fun facts about Iceland beyond our first impressions. The population of the whole country is less than 400,000 people. It's one of the most sparsely populated nations in Europe. So for a bit of context, some of the biggest sports stadiums in the world hold around 100,000 people. So you'd only need 4 really big sports stadiums and the whole population of Iceland would fit in them nicely. It's also about the same as the population of Lower Manhattan, just on a much bigger piece of land. As well as that, Iceland has very high levels of development. It is one of the highest ranked nations globally in the Human Development Index, as well as having one of the highest nominal GDPs per capita. It also scores very highly on income and gender equality. Well done, Iceland.
Thank you for that context, Emily. Yes, it's absolutely worth considering that Iceland is unlike many other countries, and these two themes of Iceland's unusual geological position and particular social and economic situation really seemed to run through our conversations while we were there. So, on our first morning, after a good night's sleep, or in Emily's case, a very early flight, we made our way to the event. So, we are here at possibly the most futuristic and grandest building that we've seen in Reykjavik so far, the Harper building, which is in Reykjavik's town centre. We've just gone up a very impressive looking staircase and we've managed to find ourselves inside the Ok-jökull event. And it's busy. From what I can see, there's a bunch of stands here with plenty of climate businesses who are displaying whatever work or activities they are up to. And we're about to go into the main hall where the first event will kick off. It's 9 a.m. We're looking forward to a busy day here of hopefully insightful conversations, grabbing some experts for some questions. They don't know who they are yet, but we'll find them.
Sounds like you were quite impressed by this building, Tom.
Yeah, it kind of just really stood out to me. To me, at least, it showed just how important this event was to Iceland, given that it was hosted in Reykjavik's possibly most striking building. I mean, there were even adverts for Iceland Innovation Week at bus stops.
It's a big deal.
Huge deal.
We spoke to event organisers Edda Konradsdóttir and Melkorka Magnusdóttir, co-founders of Iceland Innovation Week, to find out more about what they set out to achieve.
So me and Edda, we had been kind of running delegation trips for startups and helping them through accelerators, hackathons, and so on for a few years. But we had been kind of going to all these cool festivals abroad, and we kind of felt that Iceland was missing its own festival. Mm-hmm. So we just decided to do our own thing and start Iceland Innovation Week.
Yeah, we started it 2020, so this is the third time we're hosting it. But this is basically the first time we're actually hosting it because of COVID. It was just online for the past 2 years. So now we are here. We have people physically attending the events, and the festival is decentralized. So there's events happening all around the city. We have sea swimming, we have happy hours, we have serious panel discussions on the stage. And this year we also have 2 big international events, which is the climate summit called Ok-jökull, and then the other big international event is the Nordic Startup Awards, which is an award show for the startup community. And yeah, this is actually bringing over 200 people over to Iceland.
So it's called Iceland Innovation Week, and you seem to have interpreted innovation in a very broad sense. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so like one of the aims of Iceland Innovation Week is just to be the marketing window of Icelandic and Nordic innovation to the rest of the world. And we believe that we are in a pretty unique position situated between the US and Europe to do that. So we want to kind of show and showcase what is happening in innovation in startups, and we want to give startups and entrepreneurs the chance to kind of showcase their innovative abilities. But what we are also fascinated with is also just to pull innovation out of these big corporate companies that people maybe don't know what is happening. But then when you kind of start digging through the layers, you just see that they are doing so many things. And this has been really interesting for me and Edda during kind of our discussions with our collaborating companies, to see, like that you go into a retail store, and they say, we are doing this, we're doing that, we're doing this, and then we have this green policy, and then we are educating our staff in innovation, and so on and so on. So I think that is pretty fascinating.
As Edda and Melkorka make clear, and as the high-profile venue and publicity for the event suggest, this was in some ways a big sales event for Iceland. Yes, it was also a climate conference, and there was a lot of talk of challenges, of democratic accountability and equity, some of which we'll touch on later. But what the event was trying to make clear is that Iceland is a great place for businesses and investors with an interest in climate solutions. And I think the very existence and prominence of the event was a real demonstration of that. A clear statement of the importance that the country is placing on green tech and sustainable innovation.
The first half of the morning focused on how to build a more sustainable economy, from climate investing to how Iceland is positioning itself as a kind of climate hub. We heard from business leaders on why they chose Iceland as a home for their business, as well as climate investors who are very tuned into innovations in this space.
What's more, the whole event was interspersed with moments of drama. We entered to fog and bird song. At one point, there was a storm that hit the event. The stage was set as a campsite, complete with real turf and a brand new teardrop trailer from which the host/camp ranger periodically appeared to guide us through the programme.
But as we soon learned, Iceland's commitment to attracting businesses and investors goes well beyond the event itself. Here's Head of Innovation and Technology at Business Iceland, Jarþrúður Asmundsdóttir, who told us more. What's the idea behind this event? What's the kind of focus with something like this, bringing an audience here?
So the purpose with this event today is, of course, putting the spotlight on the challenges of the future, but also putting the spotlight to Iceland. Not only the destination Iceland for tourists, but also the place to come and develop these new solutions, a place to do research and development in this field, and also to point out that we have the amazing infrastructure to do that. And also, if you want to develop your solution in a truly sustainable environment, you should come here to Iceland.
And is there anything on the policy side, on the government side, that just makes it more achievable for businesses to come here?
Yeah, definitely, because the government has already shown in action that they are willing to open doors and remove hurdles for people to come in and execute their new solutions and the development part of their work here in Iceland. Of course, government all over the world usually puts speed bumps, in the way, because of regulations and stuff like that. But actually there has been really interesting development in that field for the last couple of years actually. So in Iceland we have increased the reimbursement for R&D, for example, tax incentives and so on. And we're also trying to clean the way for foreign experts to come to Iceland and work, because we know, because we are talking to the companies that are doing, like the scale-ups in Iceland, especially the ones who are working in the sustainable field, they need extra manpower and they need foreign investors. So because you asked me about this purpose of Business Iceland, we're trying to tell the story that this is a place to come and lure in the people and the money.
We've heard about some of the benefits that Iceland can offer. Do you think there are particular lessons that can be exported to the rest of the world in terms of how things are done in Iceland?
Yeah, definitely. We have been leading the way in the power transition, both in regarding heating and use of sustainable energy, of course. The next step for us is to make sure that transport will be fueled with sustainable energy as well. We have a huge history and proven track record in using geothermal and hydro energy. So yeah, I think we can probably, hopefully contribute to other places as well. But, we're just trying to do our best here. But we also know that we have this advantage and we want to tell the story about that.
Alongside Tom, you also heard our researcher Henry asking some questions there. He's normally behind the scenes, but he was a vital part of our Iceland trip, so big thanks to Henry.
Yeah, big thanks, Henry. So Jarþrúður touched on a couple of different things that make Iceland, let's say, an appealing place to develop and deliver climate solutions. On the one hand, it's what the government is doing. Something we hear again and again is that you need a favourable policy landscape to encourage investment and innovation, whether that's on tax, regulation, or direct support.
And on the other hand, it's the natural resources and infrastructure the country already has. We were amazed to find out that Iceland's energy mix is over 80% low carbon and renewable, thanks in part to its hydropower and geothermal plants, which are in turn made possible by its unique geological position at the meeting of the Eurasian and North American plates.
Now, there are all sorts of ways in which climate tech companies are making the most of these resources. One such company is Climeworks, which works in direct air capture. In the next episodes, we'll actually go into a little bit more detail on Climeworks' operations in Iceland, but at the event we spoke to Dirk Nuber about what drew them to the country in the first place.
I have actually two hats on at Climeworks. So one is I'm heading Climeworks Germany. It's kind of the minority of the work I'm doing. Majority is project development at Climeworks, and the project development part is very important for us because that is where we look for the sites where we will build or establish projects in the future. And as you can imagine, right now we have relative new technology. We need to scale it up. We need to get it large. But eventually we'll get to the point where we'll need numerous projects, probably of the same size, different sizes, but massive scale, massive capital required for that. And those are the sites that the project development team is responsible for looking at.
And on that then, what makes Iceland a good location for Climeworks?
It's almost too good to be true, to be very honest. So one thing is, we heard about it today, the entrepreneurial spirit here. But to be very honest, the natural resources, they are kind of perfect for us because they provide on one rock, so to say, on one Iceland, they provide the energy, which is geothermal energy, and which is power and heat, which we need for our process, low temperature heat. And of course the storage, which leads to mineralization so quickly that it's permanent storage. So all of that in one spot together. There are other spots in the world where that could happen, and we are looking at that jointly with Carbfix, but Iceland is perfect.
And so geographically it's perfect. What is it about the policy here that makes this a good location as well?
I would say generally politics is very supporting here. The politicians are accessible. Now that's, from my experience, I've been living on an island, slightly different, in the Caribbean for more than 10 years. That is kind of normal for that kind of small population on an island, that people are more accessible. But I think what is very special here is that accessibility comes with a lot of honesty, with a very clean kind of sense of how to do business, very little risk of bribes and corruption and that type of stuff, and just generally a supportive sense of new things to happen and of the climate to change.
You mentioned the two new sites that you'll be building off the back of the Orca one. Can you just run through that very quickly again, where you're at now with your Orca site and then what's going to happen in the next couple of years?
So the Orca site is basically commissioned, and we are still basically in the commissioning process. There are teething problems like with every new plant. That's exactly the reason why we built it. So that's happening right now. But we are planning already the next project, which is somewhere around 40,000 tons per year. And that is supposed to be commissioned in 2024. Then after that, there is already the next plan. And the reason why we have to kind of stagger it is one, speed. There's no planet B. We can't wait. And the second one is really also technology development that needs to always catch up with actual implementation. So the next plant is going to be a larger plant, definitely another 10-fold scale up, probably somewhere around 400,000 tons per year. And we are looking worldwide. You can imagine, as you know, there is this stack hub development in the US. That has, of course, a big pull for us.
As Dirk mentioned, it's not just Iceland's existing geothermal infrastructure, but also its unique geology that enable them to work alongside another company called Carbfix on permanent CO2 storage solutions. That's storing the CO2 after it's been captured. Now, obviously, Climeworks are looking to build plants internationally and to scale up over the coming years. But the particular political context of Iceland makes it a uniquely suitable place for them at this stage in their journey.
Another carbon removal company that is making the most of what Iceland has to offer is Running Tide. Now, Running Tide's approach is ocean-based, so they're supporting the growth of kelp, which captures carbon as it grows and then sinks to the ocean floor. We spoke to the company's CEO, Marty Odlin, shortly before the event itself, and you'll be hearing that conversation in a future episode. But we really wanted to grab him again on the day to hear why Running Tide is also doing this work in Iceland. Marty, we spoke to you a couple of weeks ago online, and we bumped into you at the event here in Iceland. What are you doing here?
I'm actually here because we have an office here in Reykjavik, here to work, but here to lay the groundwork for our expansion here. Obviously, attending the conference is a nice benefit, and get to meet all the exciting people and see all the interesting projects. It's fantastic.
You mentioned Iceland being so supportive of Running Tide. What does that support look like?
The Icelandic government has been absolutely incredible. It's just such a progressive mindset towards managing ocean resources. They clearly see the threat of ocean acidification to the Icelandic way of life. It's 25% of their GDP comes from fisheries, and I think they've seen the threat and they've seen the opportunity, and they're, constructing permitting pathways, connecting us to local municipalities to site our factories. And the speed at which they're willing to operate, the flexibility and dexterity of their government, and the business community here is just really amazing. Just to see how agile the business community is here and seeking out new opportunities, adapting business practices to support us. It's just been phenomenal. So I think here people see the future, right? The future that's hard to express to people in some other places, they see it very clearly here. And I think that Iceland gives me hope. Sometimes I feel like we're heading into a dark future, but there's a light here, and our job's to build that light bright enough that we can bring it to the rest of the world.
Do you see more businesses, more climate-specific businesses finding themselves here?
Yeah, there's very specific reasons why Iceland works for us, related to our solution, the position of Iceland and where it lives geographically. But I think that this seems to me like by far the most progressive country in the world in terms of climate-related solutions. The talent level here, it's a small country, but the talent is insane. So, I think that it's hard for me to predict about what other people would do, but I can't imagine people wouldn't at least take a look up here. It seems like a no-brainer.
Interesting that Marty mentioned the talent he's come across in Iceland. A quick Google search shows us that Iceland invests well over the average of other OECD countries in their educational institutions. And we already mentioned their high levels of social and gender equality. Marty's enthusiasm for Iceland was quite contagious. And I loved his idea of being able to see the future through what's already happening on Iceland's shores.
Speaking of seeing into the future, we spoke to Seth Bannon, the founding partner at early-stage VC firm 50 Years. Like many others we spoke with, Seth also told us why Iceland is such a great destination for climate tech startups. Here, though, he shared his philosophy on investing more broadly, illustrating the leap of faith inherent in supporting this space.
50 Years is a pre-seed and seed VC firm that backs deep tech startups that can make a ton of money and do a lot of good in the world.
Fantastic.
Make a ton of money and do a lot of good. That sounds great.
We think so.
So you were just on that panel. You mentioned a couple of things. Firstly was your principled approach. Could you just very briefly just talk us through kind of a bit of that?
Sure, yeah. So our firm name actually comes from an essay that Winston Churchill wrote in 1931. In this essay, he predicts genetic engineering, synthetic biology, satellite telephony, nuclear power. He predicts clean meat. So he literally says it's absurd to think that we'll grow the whole chicken just to eat the wing instead of growing the wing under a suitable medium. So just incredible sort of deep tech insight. And then in the second part of the essay, he talks about how because the pace of technology is advancing so rapidly, it's more important than ever that technologists take a principled approach to their work, because otherwise we might end up accelerating very fast, but in the wrong direction. And so we think it's really important that as technologists and entrepreneurs and VCs, that we focus on making sure we're accelerating really fast in the right direction. And then the essay is called 50 Years Hence. Highly recommend everyone read it.
That's some good bedtime reading for us. So someone asked about what you look for, and you kind of had a really nice piece on the people that you work with to found those businesses or to invest in. Could you kind of give us a bit of a flavor for what those principles are?
Yeah, so a lot of VCs try and sit back in their offices, pull out a whiteboard and sort of predict where the future of technology is going to go. And then they maybe say, okay, great. We think, fusion is going to happen in the next 2 years, and, DAC is going to happen in 4 years. And so we're going to allocate 20% towards this and 30% towards that. When we look at the history of truly breakthrough innovation, it all shares the same formula, which is at some point there were 5 to 10 people in the world that even knew the thing was possible and therefore saw how the world was going to change because of it. And those were the 5 to 10 people in the lab that just invented the technology, just figured out how to do it for the first time. And therefore, as VCs sort of thinking about where the world is going, there's only one thing you can guarantee, which is that you're going to be wrong. And so we really focus on making sure we're talking to as many of the brilliant scientists and researchers and engineers as we can. And then they tell us about that crazy innovation, hopefully. And then we, of course, run our own analysis to see if we agree. And if we do, we support them and we help them turn that into an actual company.
You had an interesting point at the end of your chat about greenwashing and how you thought that was not necessarily a good thing, but you said it had good signals.
Yeah, so there's without a doubt a lot of capital that is greenwashing, that is saying it's intended to improve sustainability or improve the climate, but it's not really. And most people in the climate space are really upset about that for good reason. I tend to get a little bit excited about it because for me, it's a sign that this ecosystem is growing, right? When we started 50 or 7 years ago, there were very few people who believed you could make money while addressing the climate crisis. And now the fact that BlackRock and some of these large money managers, the largest money managers on earth, are feeling the need to greenwash, for me is a great sign because it shows that this movement is starting to break into the mainstream. And so, yes, it's annoying and I wish they didn't do it. For me, it mainly fills me with hope.
I think this really illustrates how, in order to develop these technologies, including the portfolio of carbon removal approaches that we've always said is necessary, you need an environment that supports hundreds of early stage ideas, which may succeed or fail. After all, not even Winston could probably have conceived of such a technical solution as carbon removal.
We're beyond Churchill now, Tom. Who's going to predict where we'll be 100 years from now?
Us.
We could give it a go.
We can always try.
I'll get my crystal ball out, see how we do.
Back inside the hall, the second half of the event zoomed out to look at larger questions connected to climate justice, going beyond net zero, and how to scale up these solutions over the coming years. As well as those from the world of business, we also heard from leading figures from policy and activism.
As we've touched on, what was striking about this whole event was how different it felt from your average climate conference. The live music, the weather interludes, the campsite vibes. I mean, I loved it. But there was something else beneath it all that stuck with me. Are we really at a party in celebration mode? Or are we here to address the very serious reality of the climate crisis? I, for one, struggled to be in both camps simultaneously. Pun intended. I didn't want to forego the optimism and energy that was provided by all the performances throughout. I, like so many of us, need that just to keep going. And I didn't want to tune out the content that was coming from all sides. That the climate crisis is real and that its effects are being felt unequally.
Right. And I think what this touches on is that balance. For businesses, as much as this language may be distasteful, the climate crisis presents an opportunity. But as we know, for all of us, especially in the global north and wealthier nations, it also highlights a massive responsibility. After her contribution to the panel discussion, we spoke with Salka Sigurðardóttir, negotiator for the COP26 presidency, about why this is the case.
Hi, my name is Salka. I lead one of the negotiations team in the COP26 presidency under the UK government.
So I wanted to first talk about something that you mentioned at the beginning when you were on stage there. You talked about this idea of keeping 1.5 alive. Does that mean that it's dying, that people are losing hope in it, that this idea of staying under 1.5 degrees is dwindling?
It's a really good question. I mean, the Paris Agreement set out that we need to keep and limit global warming to at least 2 degrees and ideally 1.5 degrees to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. But still, after the Paris Agreement was agreed, we still kept not keeping to that goal and we were on track to be around 3 degrees of global warming. So what we really wanted to do with COP26 was to show that you can keep that 1.5 goal alive. It's really ambitious, but it's what scientists show what you really need to do to, as I say, avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And I think you can do that if every government plays its part in coming forward with new emission reduction targets, long-term strategies towards net zero by 2050, but do that quickly and have detailed plans towards how you're going to achieve that at a really rapid scale. I mean, we heard that a lot today. People talked about scale and speed. The solutions are already there. The agreements are already there. It's about making sure people are implementing them and implementing them fast and taking action quickly.
But also, it's not enough to just have net zero goals. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's not enough. Also because you have a lot of countries where they're already facing the impacts of climate change, particularly developing countries and poorer countries in the global south, where they're already facing floods, already facing droughts. Their communities are already being destroyed, and they're having to use a lot of their own budgets to rebuild them rather than actually focus on green transition, green jobs, energy transition. So we need to do something to support those countries who've done less historically to cause it, to ensure that they get on that track as well.
So you work with the UK government, and we're here in Iceland learning about all the amazing innovation that's happening here. Do you think the eyes of the world are sort of on Europe or the Western world in order to solve these problems?
I mean, there are to a large extent. I mean, I think the rich countries need to bear, in a way, a greater responsibility in leading the way because they've caused a lot of the emissions. And the G20 in particular needs to do more. The G7 has done all right in coming forward with targets, but G20 and a lot of countries still have more to do to come forward with more ambitious targets. They've all agreed to these deals, the Paris Agreement, COP26, the Glasgow Climate Pact, but it's really about implementing and taking action and living up to the promises that these countries have already made and doing more to tackle the problems. But it's about recognizing it's a collective responsibility where everyone needs to tackle, and in particular the big emitters.
You've already mentioned this on stage, but I'm hoping you can just sort of reiterate it for us here. And that was the question of the climate problem, the climate crisis, not sinking into the background when other crises appear.
Absolutely. I mean, we see a lot of crises, I suppose, competing with the climate. And for example, when COVID happened, you have suddenly a lot of government money going into fixing COVID. Now, if that same amount of money was mobilized to tackle the climate, we will be going through this transition much faster. And then you have rising energy prices, cost of living, inflation is going up, you have the war in Ukraine and other places. And if a government focus keeps shift on other crises, and the climate crisis is seen as less urgent or more in the future, but what we need to recognize is that the climate crisis is urgent now. We cannot wait to take action as other matters take over. It's about looking at it holistically and not putting climate in the back seat once you have other things happening, and really weaving it into all narratives. We talked about, for example, on COVID, is a green recovery. It's recognizing when you recover from COVID to do that in a green way. And when you build back infrastructure or when you build back solutions, is to weave climate into it every step along the way.
Salka rightly made the point here that wealthy nations have a huge responsibility in this climate crisis. Maybe this event demonstrates the beginnings of that work, taking action to fight a global issue. However, she also reminds us that carbon removal and reduction are just a part of the picture. Many nations require considerable money and resources to deal with adaptation, resilience, and crisis relief as they face the worst effects of climate change right now. It's a global problem and it needs a global response.
Yeah, and that responsibility of more developed nations won't only be borne by businesses. It also requires democratic accountability. Over the past few years, the voices of young people have really come to the fore in the climate justice and transition movements, and will prove vital in ensuring that these technologies are rolled out in an equitable manner and at the pace that we need. Having heard what Iceland's political world is doing to attract climate businesses to the country, we wanted to know how else is it supporting this transition? And specifically, are youth voices able to influence policy change in this area? To find out, we spoke with Tina Hallgrímsdóttir of the Icelandic Youth Environmentalist Association.
This is a youth-driven NGO with 1,300 members across the country. Tina told us about one particular project they'd recently run, which offers an inspiring example of how young people really can shift the conversation on climate policy.
We wanted to create a platform where youth voices and opinions of youth on climate and environmental matters would really be put into the spotlight and presented to politicians. So we created a criterion with 78 statements that we wanted to make it to their policies before the parliamentary elections last September. So it was all very science-based. It included arguments and citations as to why we want this to be in their policies. We gave it to them, and then they had several months to adjust their policies if they wanted to. So it's like a preliminary approach also. And then once we get the policies final, we go over them and then grade them. So we both managed to change the policies when they were in the making, as well as after we published the grades, we were giving the public one of the tools that they can use to make an informed decision in the elections. And of course they can look at the overall grade, but they can also just see specific topics that they're passionate about and if the parties have promised to implement them.
To be honest, this like blows my mind because the culture I grew up in was like, young people don't have any say about politics because they don't know, because they haven't lived it. Do you think in Iceland, like the culture around youth involvement in change and transition and policy is quite strong? Or is it something that's just grown because of the crisis that we face?
Yeah, I think because I've been in this NGO for 5 years and I've really seen big changes, also just regarding how important we think climate matters are. But now we've reached the point where they literally can't ignore our opinions anymore and they have to take them into account. So it's just a matter of changing. I don't know if it's greater in Iceland than in other places, but at least this project we did that was entirely youth-driven was taken very seriously, and it got a lot of publicity, and the politicians had to answer or boost of their grade many weeks afterwards. So it's like really, really gained attention. Yeah.
So you talked in the panel about this question of like, the goal isn't to solve the climate crisis in the way that it was. Like there's an evolution that needs to happen as the crisis is evolving. And you talked about how the crisis develops sort of ever more rapidly as we're going. Is it possible to keep up with that and to evolve at the same rate that it's developing?
So there needs to be some evolution, but we just need to transform what kind of evolution we're heading to. We can't even continue the same thing we're doing and just change our energy sources. That won't suffice, So we need to make bigger changes. But when we look at the scientific evidence, we see that the window of opportunity is open, but we need to act fast. And we see that global emissions need to peak the latest by 2025. So it's a bleak picture, but we also see very clearly that we can make it happen. And I think we can just say we got ourselves into this mess in the first place, so we can surely unwind it, and that will intertwine with all of our other goals. We will never reach any of our sustainability goals or just to secure a good life for everyone if we don't achieve this fast.
Are you hopeful?
Well, I don't have the option not to be. My guiding light is like informed optimism. So we don't fool ourselves and think that we can just hope and think that everything's going to solve itself because there is a possibility that it will, but without taking big and fast steps now. So we need to be realistic. It's like stubborn optimism. We need to have our eyes on the goal, but we can't think it will just happen by itself. So yeah.
What a powerful note to end on there. And actually a really inspiring one as well. That idea of stubborn optimism. We have to think we can do this, so we're gonna do it. Made me come away from the whole conference just feeling really empowered.
Yeah, and something else that came to mind when we finished our conversation with Tina was this saying that kept coming up in conversation throughout the day. It's an Icelandic saying, "Þetta rettast," and it kind of loosely translates as "it's all going to work out okay."
It was definitely one of many moments throughout the day that made me think about the particular combination of factors that make Iceland a good place for these climate businesses. We, of course, need to be careful not to make sweeping generalizations about cultural attitudes. And as we've said, this was essentially a window display for Icelandic innovation. So I suppose a sense of endless possibility was always going to be inevitable.
I was definitely the child in the window.
Gazing at the window display. Well, that's the point. They did a really good job,
Really good job.
And there did seem to be this real sense of optimism on display. We've also touched on some of the many other things that support that optimism. The political structures, the energy infrastructure, as well as the many unusual geological properties of the country being between those two tectonic plates. So I guess in some ways, Iceland actually has a lot to be optimistic about.
And I think something that's really important to bear in mind is also the particular moment that we're in with carbon removal, and that Iceland is really making the most of this moment. Now, while there are many technologies and businesses that are out there, as we know, this space is still very much in its infancy. And taking it back to Seth Bannon from 50 Years, I think he really brought home the reality of what that looks like when he described how investors like him should be seeking out the technologies that only a handful of people even know are possible. In the years to come, carbon removal is going to be about massively increasing the scale of operations. It's going to be about developing the policy and the infrastructure that supports thousands of large-scale projects across all sorts of different countries. But right now, it's also just about testing out these emergent approaches and scaling them up to just the thousands of, or even tens of thousands of tons as a proof of concept. With its geology and support for innovation, Iceland just really feels well equipped to answer that call and really serve as a major site for this kind of work.
Yeah, so I guess the question becomes, is Iceland merely a very good playground for climate ideas that'll help things like carbon removal reach a stage where they can be deployed much more widely? Or is it giving us a glimpse into the future, modelling the sort of economy that we could all aim towards over the coming decades? Both sound pretty awesome. The OK Bye event certainly welcomed us into that playground, and we at the Carbon Removal Show got really excited for what it might look like. And the event also really sold Iceland as a place to invest in. My question is there more to learn here?
Totally. And I think something else which stuck with me coming to the end of that day, and I think is something that one of the panelists said, Marie Ekelund from 2025. She said that climate isn't just a sector, and we shouldn't necessarily consider it as a sector if we're investing in it, for example. It's really a full transformation of our whole economy.
Yeah, everything is either already touched by or going to be touched by the climate crisis, so it has to be integrated into everything we do.
Holding these insights in mind, in the next episode, we'll be taking to the road to see some of the exciting work happening in Iceland for ourselves.
Looking forward to it. See you next time.
See you then. Thanks to everyone who makes this show possible.
Our researcher and fact-checker, Henry Irvine.
Our composer, Sam Carter.
Our graphic designer, Reke Campbell.
Our content manager, Jordan Brooks.
Our guest booker, Anna DeWolf Evans.
Our editor, Mercy Barno.
Our producer, Ben Weaver Hinks.
Our project manager, Patrick Carter.
And our executive producer, Sam Floy. Thank you so much for listening to the Carbon Removal Show. Follow us on Twitter at RestoredCC, follow us on LinkedIn at The Carbon Removal Show, and you can visit our website, restored.cc. We're all over the internet. And please remember to give us a rate and review, it really makes a difference. Thank you so much.
Co-fruition.